on the edge of a vast city where the glow of glass towers never reached the ground. A rusted car rattled down a narrow dirt road, its headlights cutting trembling cones of light through dust and smoke. Inside, a small boy of 6 sat pressed against the door, eyes wide, hands clinging to a faded cloth rabbit, while his parents stared ahead in a silence so heavy it felt like another passenger. And the city's heartbeat drummed faintly beyond, promising everything and nothing at once. His mother's hands shaking in her lap as she whispered, almost to herself, "It's just for a while, right, Arun?" And his father, jaw clenched so tight his words came out like stones, muttered, "We don't have a choice, Mira. The doctors said. They said it's incurable. They want money we don't have. And your brother won't take him. My parents won't take him. No one will." And in the back seat, the boy, named Ravi, looked from one adult to the other, and asked, in a small but steady voice, "Mama, what does incurable mean?" And Mira flinched, as if slapped, turning to him with eyes that glistened in the dim light. It just means you get tired easier than other kids, son. It doesn't mean anything else. It doesn't." But Ravi watched a tear slide down her cheek and knew, in the strange sharp way children sometimes know, that she was not telling the whole truth. The car slowing as the smooth road broke into uneven stones, then dirt, then mud, the air changing to something thicker, heavier, smelling of sewage and smoke, and too many bodies breathing in one place. And when the car finally halted, Ravi pressed his face to the window, and saw a maze of shanties' tin roofs, held down with rocks, walls of tarpaulin, and old advertisement boards, children barefoot in the dark, men sitting on overturned crates, smoke curling from oil lamps, and dogs with ribs like the fingers of a hand. The boy whispering, "Where are we?" And his father answered, not looking at him, "Just somewhere you'll be safe for a while." Voice rough and unconvincing, the words trembling in the air like loose wires. Then the door opened. The night's damp heat swallowed him, and Mira took his hand, pulling him gently but urgently. "Come, Ravi, come out, careful." Her touch both tender and desperate, as she led him past a group of children, who paused their game to watch, past a woman washing clothes in a cracked plastic tub, the water gray and cold, past a man sleeping under a cart, bottle still in his hand, until they reached a spot beside a crumbling brick wall, where a pile of sacks formed a kind of corner, and Arun set down a small cloth bag with Ravi's clothes and the cloth rabbit on top. "Mama," Ravi asked, eyes searching the dark, as if trying to see the shape of this new place in one glance. "Why are we stopping here? Where's the doctor? You said we were going to see a doctor." And Mira's throat tightened, so much she could barely breathe, because they had indeed seen the doctor earlier that week, sitting in a white room that smelled too clean. The man in a white coat explaining in clinical tones how the boy's heart had a hole, how his lungs were weak, how his body would tire easily, how treatment existed, yes, but it was expensive, long, and with no guarantee. And with every number he named, she had watched Aaron's shoulders sink, the way his gaze had slipped to the floor. And now, in the thick night air, she knelt before her son, and cupped his face. "Ravi, you're a brave boy, aren't you?" she said, voice trembling. "You remember when the doctor put all those wires on you, and you didn't even cry. You're so strong." And Ravi nodded uncertainly, I'm strong, Mama, he echoed. But, why do I have to be strong here? And Aaron's voice cut in, blunt and tired. Because you're not going home with us tonight. And the words hung there, cold and final, and Mira's eyes snapped to her husband. Arun, she began, but he cut her off. We have to be honest with him. His tone cracking, as he finally knelt too, looking at their boy. Ravi, listen to me. We can't take care of you. Right now. The medicine, the hospital, the food, everything. I've tried. I promise, I've tried. And Ravi's heart felt like it skipped in his small chest. The world spinning a little. You're leaving me, he whispered, and his voice was so soft. It seemed the slum itself hushed to hear it. A dog's bark fading, pots clinking somewhere in the distance. And Mira broke then, pulling him into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry, son, I'm so sorry, she sobbed into his hair. If I could take your sickness from you, I would, I swear to you. And Ravi clung to her, breathing in her familiar scent of jasmine and laundry soap. The one safe thing in this strange, loud world. But, I'll come home tomorrow, right? He whispered into her sorry. After I'm strong again. And she shook, unable to answer, until Arun placed a shaking hand on her shoulder. We'll come back to see you, he said, not entirely sure if he was lying, or only hoping. There are people here, you see, other children, you'll make friends. They'll look after you, you'll learn to look after yourself. And Ravi pulled away slightly, looking around at the shadowy faces peering from doorways, at the rough ground, at the sky cut into narrow strips by uneven roofs. But, who will tuck me in? He asked. Who will tell me stories? And Mira's face crumpled. The stars, she choked out, brushing a curl from his forehead. The stars will tell you stories. And when you look at them, think of me, thinking of you. And he nodded, trying to be a brave boy, because she said he was brave. But his lip trembled and his small chest rose and fell too fast. Then, like a clock striking, Arun stood abruptly, grabbed Mira's arm and pulled her up. We have to go, he said, eyes flashing with something like panic. If we stay, we won't be able to leave. And Mira's fingers slid from Ravi's hand, even as she cried, wait, just one more minute, just one more. But the night swallowed her plea. As they turned away, walking faster than they meant to, the rusted car's engine coughing back to life, Ravi stumbling forward a step. Mama, Papa, he called out, at first with confusion, then fear. Wait, you forgot my rabbit, holding the cloth toy out in one shaking hand. But the car was already rolling. Mira's face a blur in the window, eyes drowning, hand pressed uselessly to the glass. And Arun staring straight ahead, knuckles white, jaw a landscape of regret. And the last thing Ravi heard before the car disappeared into the deeper dark was his mother's wail. Cut off by distance and the closing of the world, leaving him alone beside the brick wall, clutching his rabbit. The slum's sounds closing around him like an unfamiliar song. He did not yet know the words to. In the years that followed, the slum taught Ravi those words in harsh, unrelenting syllables: hunger, cold, fear, and a strange, quiet kind of courage that grows only in places where no one else will stand for you. The boy sleeping that first night curled up against the sacks, arms wrapped around his knees, and his weak heart thudding too loudly in his ears, as a stray dog crept close to sniff him and then, sensing something fragile, settled a few feet away like a ragged guardian. In the morning, the slum's true face revealed itself in the light. Narrow alleys lined with mismatched shelters. Puddles of stagnant water reflecting the sky in broken mirrors. Men hauling carts, women balancing pots on their hips. Children weaving through the chaos like thin, restless shadows. And Ravi, blinking against the sun, realized with a sudden stone drop, of a feeling that his parents were really gone. That the car was not coming back. That the world he knew had ended. "Mama," he called into the shifting crowd. Just once, voice cracking. But the only answer was a woman shouting at a boy to bring back a bucket, and a vendor calling prices for bruised fruit, and a radio somewhere blaring a film song. After a while, he stopped calling and simply sat, knees pulled up, watching, and that was when she approached him, the first to truly see him. "You're new," said a voice, sharp but not unkind, and Ravi looked up to see a girl of perhaps 9. Her hair tied in 2 loose braids. Her eyes quick and assessing. A chipped bangle clinking on her wrist. "What are you doing there like a lost puppy?" And Ravi swallowed. I'm waiting," he replied. "My parents said they'd come back." And the girl snorted, not cruelly but with the dry wisdom of someone older than she looked. "No one comes back here. Not if they could leave," she said, then saw his face, and softened just a little, squatting down to his level. "What's your name?" "Ravi," he answered, fingers twisting in the rabbit's ear. "I'm Tara," she introduced herself, glancing at the cloth toy. "Nice rabbit," she added with attempted brightness. "He looks like he's been through a war." And Ravi almost smiled. "He's had a lot of adventures," he murmured, then coughed. A deep, chesty sound that made him wince. A hand going instinctively to his sternum. And Tara's gaze sharpened. "You sick?" she asked bluntly. "You sound like old Gopal when it rains." And Ravi shrugged. "The doctor said my heart is funny," he said softly. "And I get tired." And Tara studied him for a moment, then jerked her chin. "Come on, funny heart. You can't just sit here or someone will kick you away like trash," she declared. "You need a place, and some water. And if you're lucky, a piece of stale roti." And when he hesitated, she rolled her eyes. "I'm not going to sell you. You don't look worth much," she said, half teasing, and that tiny joke, that flicker of normalcy, broke through his paralysis. And he stood, his legs shaky. "Okay," he agreed. "But what if my parents come back and can't find me?" And Tara's expression clouded briefly. "If they come back, the whole basti will know," she said, using the local word for the slum. "People talk. Nothing stays secret. Now move before Rafiq uncle sees you there and demands rent for the air you're breathing." Over the months and then years, Tara became his compass in the maze, showing him where to refill water from a leaky pipe before the line grew too long, where to avoid a certain alley after dark because that's where the drunken uncles shout too loud, teaching him how to fold cardboard, to make a softer bed, how to guard his pockets when men with kind smiles and cold eyes offered sweets. "They're not your friends," she'd whisper. "They're looking for someone they can use. Understand?" And Ravi would nod, his thin face serious, his body already learning to shift and disappear. When danger walked by, he quickly discovered that his sickness was both a curse and an invisible wall between him and the other slum kids. When they raced through the alleys, He could run only a few steps before his breath caught fire in his chest, his vision going spotty, his heart hammering as if trying to punch through his ribs. So he learned to sit and watch, to laugh with them at the finish line instead, pretending he didn't want to join. Some days, the cough shook him so hard he curled around it, eyes watering, while Tara rubbed his back with a small firm hand. Breathe, Ravi, slow, like this. She'd instruct, demonstrating, in and out. Don't fight it so much. And he'd cling to her words like a rope, dragging air back into his lungs. Other days, he felt almost normal. But even then, small things reminded him. Climbing a short flight of steps left his legs trembling. Lifting a bucket made his arms ache. And on those nights he lay awake listening to the slum breathe around him. The distant argument, the baby wailing, the clatter of a pan, and wondered if his parents were also awake somewhere in the city, thinking of him, or if they had folded him away in their minds like an old photograph, tucked into a drawer that never opened. He would whisper into the dark, "Mama, I looked at the stars today," because she had asked him to. They were small because the smoke was big, but I tried, and though no one answered, the speaking brought a strange comfort, as if he were tying a thread between that moment and the one 5 years ago, when her hand slipped from his. Survival in the slum was a series of negotiations, some with people, some with fate. At 7, Ravi learned to collect scrap with the other kids, trailing behind older boys who knew which dumpsters yielded broken electronics, which piles of rubble hid copper wire. His steps slower but his eyes sharp, spotting a discarded plastic bottle here, a twisted metal spoon there. Anything that could weigh the sack down just enough to exchange for a few coins. At the junk shop, you pick the light stuff, you get light money. The junk shop owner, a lanky man named Shahid, would say, weighing their sacks with a bored expression, "But you, little one," he'd add to Ravi, "you're clever, always finding the small things others miss." And for a boy who was so often the one left behind, those words glowed like embers in his chest. At 8, a food vendor named Laxmi began shooing him away from her stall less often, and instead, on really good days, would slide him the burnt edges of flatbreads or the vegetable bits too crushed to sell, muttering, "Don't just stand there making the place look sad. Boy, if you're going to loiter, at least wash these plates." And he'd grin shyly and do as she asked, the soapy water stinging his cracked knuckles, but the warmth of food filling him with a lightness his failing heart could not. When he coughed too much, she'd frown. "Still that cough, your chest sounds like my old scooter." And he'd answer, a bit proudly even in his misery, "The doctor said it's incurable," because that long word made it sound official, like he had something rare, not just broken lungs in a forgotten body. And she'd click her tongue. Doctors don't know everything, but they know enough to charge too much. Then press a steel tumbler of hot, sweet tea into his shaking hands. "Drink. It will make you feel like the world is kinder, even if it's lying." Yet for every small kindness, there were 10 cuts. Men who shouted at him to move when he rested his back too long against their wall. Boys who mocked his breathlessness, imitating his gasps until Tara smacked one of them across the back of the head, snapping, "He can't help it, fool." And Ravi would tug her sleeve. "It's okay, I don't mind." Though his ears burned, rainstorms that turned the alleys into rivers of oily water. his thin shirt clinging to his shivering frame, his cough deepening until even laughing hurt. The nights of fever when the slum's flimsy roofs drumbeat with downpour and he curled on his side, feeling each heartbeat as a heavy, uncertain thud, whispering to nobody, "Please, just let me see the morning." His own bargaining as small and unremarked as the raindrops hitting plastic. As he grew from 6 to 7, then 8, 9, 10, and finally 11. His body stretched but did not fill out. Bones still visible at his wrists and collar. His eyes too big for his thin face, yet inside, some parts of him hardened in ways that did not show. He learned to recognize when men's stares lingered too long on the younger children and to steer them away. Invented little games that took the smallest ones to other alleys when danger hung in the air. Race you to the blue door, he'd call, even though he could barely run, letting the littlest sprint ahead while he walked. Breath measured, chest tight but determined, he learned that some days he had to choose between buying medicine from a cramped pharmacy with grimy glass, tablets that made his heart beat steadier, his breathing easier for a while, or buying an extra piece of bread. And often he chose the bread, telling himself, "If I'm full, I'll be less tired anyway." Until one day, at around 10 years old, after collapsing near the water tap and waking to Tara's frantic face above him, he chose the medicine instead, the bitter tablet sticking to his tongue, as he swallowed and thought, "Not today, I'm not leaving her today." The question of his parents never left entirely but shifted shape. In the first year, he watched every car that came near the slum's edge, eyes straining, heart leaping at the sight of a blue sedan, a floral scarf, any fragment that might belong to Mira or Arun. In the second year, he stopped looking every day and only glanced up sometimes when a car horn sounded nearby. By the third, he had constructed elaborate stories where they were searching for him through the city, hindered by cruel relatives or some bureaucratic nightmare. Stories he whispered to himself at night as if they were lullabies. By the fourth, anger sometimes flared, raw and confusing. Why did they not fight harder? Why did they not at least write or send word? But it burned out quickly, leaving only the cool ash of resignation. By the 5th year, the idea of them had become more like a fairy tale than a memory, blurry at the edges. His mother's face remembered more by the feeling of her hand on his hair than the exact shape of her nose. His father's voice, more an echo than a sound. One evening, sitting with Tara on the edge of the slum, watching the sky turn from orange to bruised purple, Ravi asked, "Do you ever think about before?" And Tara, who had been orphaned younger than she could recall, shook her head. "There was no before, for me," she said simply, "only this," then nudged his shoulder. "But for you, there was a big house and toys and school, right?" And he frowned, trying to see it. "There was a small house," he corrected softly, "not big, but it had walls that didn't move when the wind blew. And my mother used to make kheer on my birthday, and there was a fan on the ceiling that made a rattling sound every night. Like a cricket," he added, a small smile touching his lips. "I used to complain that the electricity would go, and now I think, at least there was electricity to go." And they both laughed quietly, the sound mingling with the evening noises, until his laughter broke into a cough. And Tara thumped his back gently. "You're getting worse," she observed, not as scolding but as fact, and he nodded, long used to the way each year seemed to carve out a little more of his strength, leaving him with less to trade for another day. By the time he reached 11, his episodes had become more frequent. Sudden moments when the world tilted, when his heart misstepped, when sound grew distant as if he were underwater and he had to focus on one thing. A smell, a texture, the feel of his rabbit's worn ear. To keep from slipping entirely, the older women in the slum would sometimes cluck their tongues when he passed, murmuring, "That boy is fading," as if he were a stain in the sun. And one of them, a toothless lady named Shanti, stopped him one afternoon to press a rough hand to his forehead. "You carry too much sadness in those bones," she pronounced. "It weighs you down more than your sickness." And he smiled faintly. "I don't have time to be sad, Shanti auntie," he replied. "I have to help Tara get water." But her words lodged in him nonetheless. Another quiet stone in an already heavy pocket. And yet, even in all this, there were tiny joys that insisted on existing. The way the slum glowed golden for a few brief minutes at sunset when the low lights slipped between shacks and made even plastic and tin look gentle. The laughter of a baby when he pulled a funny face, the shared piece of sweet jaggery someone handed him on a festival day, the radio playing a song he loved and Tara grabbing his hands, declaring, "Come on, funny heart. If you can't run, at least you can dance with your fingers." And they would wiggle their hands in the air, giggling like the children. They still were underneath all the grit. Then, one particularly hot afternoon, when the flies buzzed thick and the heat rose off the ground in waves, Ravi's heart finally asked more than his frail body could give. He was standing in line at the water tap, a dented metal pot at his feet, the sun pressing on the back of his neck like a hand, when suddenly the crowd's murmurs grew distant. The edges of his vision blurred, and a pressure like a fist gripped his chest, squeezing. "Not now," he thought, panic flaring as he tried to take a breath and found only half of one. The next coming in sharp and shallow, his fingers going numb around the pot's handle. Someone shouted as the pot tipped, clanging against the concrete, water spilling in a shimmering arc. And Ravi fell to his knees, coughing, but this time the cough did not clear his lungs. It only seemed to tangle the air more, his heartbeat wild and offbeat, his surroundings spinning into a whirl of voices. "Hey, boy, move him. He's blocking the tap. He's turning blue. Call someone." None of which he could sort into sense. Then a familiar voice cut through, high and fierce. "Ravi." Tara pushed through the cluster of bodies, dropping beside him, her hands on his shoulders. "Look at me, okay? Look at me," she demanded, but his eyes wouldn't quite focus, and the sunlight behind her head made her look like a shadow. I can't," he whispered, words catching on his breath, his chest heaving uselessly, and she shouted at the others, "Give him space. Can't you see he can't breathe?" And when the crowd parted a little, the heat rushed in even more. Suffocating. Someone suggested taking him to the government hospital, but it was too far and their voices argued about rickshaw money. While he lay there, the world slipping away like water through fingers, until another voice, older, quieter, but carrying a weight that cut through the chaos, spoke from the edge of the circle. "Move aside, all of you," it said, calm as the inside of a temple. "Let me see the boy." Into his narrowing view stepped an elderly man he had seen around the slum, but never really noticed. Tall even in his stoop, with a shock of white hair, a trimmed beard, and eyes so gentle it was almost painful to meet them. His name, as Ravi would soon learn, was Kareem, though everyone called him Baba Kareem. And he ran a tiny tea stall on the main road, a wooden counter with 2 benches where drivers and laborers came for hot tea and a few minutes of conversation. Now, he knelt carefully beside Ravi, his joints creaking, and placed a cool, steady hand on the boy's forehead. "Breathe with me, son," he said softly, his tone so ordinary, so unafraid, that for a moment it anchored Ravi. "In and out, even if it hurts." And Ravi tried, clutching at those words as the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly gone liquid. His breaths ragged but following the rhythm of the elder man's voice. His pulse is weak, Kareem murmured to Tara, who hovered close, eyes wild, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks. "And his chest. This is not new, is it?" And she shook her head, swallowing back a sob. "He's always been like that, but today it's worse. I don't know what to do." And Kareem looked at the boy's 2 thin arms, the shadowed hollows beneath his eyes, and felt a swell of anger, not at the child, or even at the slum, but at a world so indifferent it could allow a boy like this to drift, untethered, for so long. "We should take him to the hospital," someone repeated, and Kareem nodded slowly. "Yes, we should, but by the time we reach, by the time someone sees him." He trailed off, and in his silence everyone heard the truth. That Ravi's battle had been a long one. That this might not be a wound any hospital could stitch. Then, in a decision that surprised even himself with its certainty, Kareem said, "Help me lift him." And when Tara blinked at him, confused, he clarified, "I'm taking him home." And there was something in the quiet conviction of his words that made no one argue. Carefully, as if he were made of glass, the elder slipped an arm under Ravi's shoulders and another beneath his knees, lifting him with a grunt, the boy's lightness more alarming than his weight would have been. And Ravi's head lolled against the man's chest, his breath fluttering in short, bird-like bursts. "I'll come too," Tara insisted, wiping her nose on her sleeve. And Kareem glanced at her, seeing not just the dirt-smudged, frantic girl but the invisible years of companionship between her and this boy. Then nodded. "Of course you will, child," he replied. He should not be among strangers now. As they walked the few alleys to Kareem's tiny room, a brick-walled cube tucked behind the tea stall, Ravi drifted in and out, catching flashes, the bright blue of the sky between tin roofs, the roughness of Kareem's shirt against his cheek, Tara's small hand gripping his, her thumb rubbing fiercely as if she could keep him tethered by touch. "Alone." Once he whispered, "I'm sorry," half to her, half to the world, and she bent close. "Don't you dare say sorry," she hissed, voice breaking. "You haven't done anything wrong. You hear me? You're just sick, you idiot." And he almost laughed again at the insult wrapped in care. Kareem's home, when they reached it, was simple but felt like another planet compared to the shifting, scrap-walled shelters. There was a real door that closed, a mat laid neatly on the floor, a low shelf with cups lined up, and on the wall, a faded photograph of a woman and a little boy smiling at the camera, their faces full of a joy so open it almost hurt to look at. Kareem gently lowered Ravi onto the mat, propping his head with a folded cloth, then rummaged through a small tin, pulling out a blister pack of tablets and a bottle of water. "These are for my pressure," he said, more to himself than to the children. They won't fix his heart, but they might help him rest. And with careful hands he helped Ravi swallow half a tablet, then dabbed his lips with a damp cloth. There, son, there. He murmured. You're safe here, do you understand? No one will push you off the ground in this room. As the air cooled slightly and Ravi's breathing eased from desperate gasps to shallow but more regular inhales, a strange calm settled in the little room, the kind that comes after the storm has already decided whether or not you will stand. Tara sat cross-legged near his feet, watching him as if afraid he would vanish if she looked away, and Kareem brewed tea on a small stove in the corner. The familiar clink of spoon against steel somehow intimate in this new context. After a while, Ravi's eyes fluttered open fully, focusing on the old man. Where are we? He asked, voice thin but clearer, and Kareem smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. In my palace, he replied lightly, gesturing around at the modest space. What? You don't see the golden walls and dancing girls? And Ravi managed a ghost of a smile. Your palace is very small, he murmured, but cleaner than most palaces I've seen. And Kareem chuckled softly. You have a sharp tongue for someone with such a tired body, he observed, then grew more serious. My name is Kareem, though most call me Baba. This is my home. From today, until, as long as you need, it is your home too. And something in the finality of his tone made Tara's eyes snap to his face. You mean he can stay? She asked, hope and fear jostling in her words. Not just for a night. And Kareem met her gaze steadily. I mean he should not have to fight for a corner of the street any longer. He said simply. There is space on this floor for 3 bodies to sleep instead of 1. My old bones do not take up much room, and Ravi swallowed, emotion rising like a tide. Why? He whispered, staring at this man who owed him nothing. Why would you? And Kareem's eyes flicked briefly to the photograph on the wall, to the woman and boy frozen in a time before grief, before loss. Because once, a long time ago, I had a son with eyes like yours. He answered quietly. He got sick, and I lost him. And there was nothing I could do. I could not save him, but maybe I can make another boy's last days less empty. And though he did not say, last, out loud, it trembled in the air between them, understood by all. Ravi did not flinch from it. He had lived with the idea of his own ending for so long it no longer felt like a stranger. But hearing it acknowledged with such gentleness, without pity or avoidance, made his eyes fill. I'm sorry about your son, he said, sincere, and Kareem shrugged one shoulder. Grief is a houseguest who never leaves, he replied. You learn to live around it. Now, let an old man feel useful before he joins the ancestors, And Ravi's lips twitched at the dry humor, some tension loosening in his chest. In the 10 days that remained to him, time seemed to both slow and deepen, each hour holding more than entire weeks had before. Tara moved more or less into Kareem's little home. Helping at the tea stall in the mornings, washing glasses, wiping tables, taking coins with a seriousness that made the customers smile. Then spending afternoons and evenings in the room, telling Ravi everything that happened outside. Rafiq's uncle slipped in the mud today and blamed the sky, she reported one day, making him wheeze with soft laughter. And Shanti auntie says you better not die without saying goodbye to her properly. She's still angry you took her bucket last month. And he replied, voice weaker but amused. You can tell her, I'm not planning to die without returning borrowed items. Then paused, the humor flickering. Though, I don't think I'll be planning much at all after a while. And she leaned over him sharply, eyes fierce. You're not allowed to talk like that, she snapped. Then, softer, not yet, okay. And he reached for her hand, fingers barely curling around hers. Okay, he agreed, if only to ease the crack in her voice. Kareem, for his part, became a quiet, steady presence, a new orbit in Ravi's small universe. He brought him simple, soft food, khichdi, mashed bananas, lightly spiced tea cooled to just the right temperature, and told him stories between serving customers. Tales of his own childhood in a faraway village where the air was cleaner and the nights darker, of ishing with his father, of falling in love with the woman in the photograph, of the birth of his son, of the day he left that village for the city with dreams bigger than his pockets. And look where that brought me, he would conclude, half wry, half fond, gesturing at his leaning tea stall. King of chai, ruler of one wooden counter. And Ravi would listen, eyes shining. I never had a king before, he said one evening, the corners of his mouth lifting. I think I chose well, and Kareem laughed softly, then reached down to smooth the boy's hair back, a gesture as instinctive as breathing. And I never had a son again, he replied, until you walked into my basti and decided to make my floor your bed. And though the words were light, there was a weight behind them that wrapped around Ravi like a blanket thicker than any cloth. At night, when the air cooled and the sounds of the slum dulled to a low hum, Ravi would lie between Kareem and Tara, feeling for the first time in years the sense of being part of something that could be called a family. An odd, stitched together one, but a family nonetheless. One night he whispered into the dark, "It's warm." And Tara, half asleep, grumbled, "Of course it's warm, we're all sweating." But he shook his head, shifting slightly so his hand brushed Kareem's sleeve on one side and Tara's on the other. "No, I mean, in here," he clarified, tapping his chest lightly, above the heart that had always failed him. "It feels less empty." And in the quiet that followed, Kareem's voice came softly from the darkness. "That is what it feels like when you belong somewhere, son," he said. "It does not fix the body, but it eases the soul." And Ravi turned his face into his thin pillow, letting silent tears soak into the cloth. Not from pain this time, but from a kind of overflowing he had not expected to feel again. As the days passed, his strength dwindled, each simple movement costing more. His world shrinking to the length of the mat, to the patterns in the cracked ceiling, to the sound of Kareem's kettle whistling and Tara's quick footsteps. On the 7th day, he asked Kareem, "Do you think my parents ever think of me?" And the old man considered his answer carefully. "I think it is very hard to forget a child," he said at last. "Even if you try, their laughter follows you, their cries follow you. Their absence follows you. People do foolish, cruel things out of fear and desperation. But forgetting, that is harder than you think." And Ravi nodded slowly, comforted not by forgiveness, which he was not sure he had to give, but by the idea that somewhere in the sprawling city, too, hearts might still ache in the shape of him. "If they came now," he murmured, more to himself than to the room, "I would tell them I found another home." And Tara, sitting by his side, bristled. "You already had a home," she objected, then softened. "But, yes, tell them that," and for the first time, the word Home did not sting. It simply rested on his tongue like something he was allowed to claim. On the 9th evening, as a monsoon shower pelted the tin roofs, filling the air with the rich smell of wet earth, Ravi lay listening, his breaths shallow but peaceful, his eyes following a raindrop that had found its way through a crack in the ceiling and was sliding slowly down the wall. I used to be afraid of the rain, he confessed quietly, because everything got colder and harder and my chest hurt more, and there was nowhere dry to sleep. And Kareem, who sat nearby counting his coins, replied, "And now?" And Ravi smiled faintly. "Now it sounds like someone clapping for the world," he said, lids drooping, like the sky saying, "Well done for living another day." And Kareem's hands stilled around the coins, his throat tightening. "Well done," he echoed under his breath, more to the boy than to the day. That night, Ravi's dreams were softer than they had ever been in the slum. He dreamed of stars not dimmed by smoke, of a fan that rattled like a cricket, of a table where 3F figures sat, his mother, his father, and Kareem, sharing food and passing plates, while Tara sat cross-legged on the floor, complaining loudly that no one had given her the biggest piece of bread. And in the dream he laughed without coughing, his chest light, his limbs strong, and when he woke just before dawn on the 10th day, he carried that image with him, like a warmth that did not fade. The room was dim, the first gray light filtering through the small window. Kareem lay dozing on one side, his breath steady, while Tara, on the other, had shifted in her sleep, one hand still resting near Ravi's, as if even unconscious she could not bring herself to let go completely. Ravi watched their faces quietly, trying to memorize them, the deep lines and gentle mouth of the elder, the fierce eyebrows and soft cheeks of the girl, because somewhere deep inside, beyond fear, he knew that this morning was different, that some invisible clock was nearing its final chime. His body felt strangely heavy and light at once, as if he were both sinking into the mat and floating above it, and when he took a breath, it came with difficulty but not with the panic of before, instead, with an odd, calm resistance, as if his lungs were saying, "We've done what we can." After a while, he whispered, "Baba," and Kareem's eyes opened instantly, years of early mornings waking him quickly. He responded, shifting to face the boy, and when he saw the clarity in Ravi's gaze, he understood more than any words could have told him. "Is it time?" he asked softly, and Ravi considered, then nodded a little. "I think so," he replied, not afraid, just tired in a way that went beyond sleep. "My heart, it feels like a bird that's been flying too long." And Kareem swallowed, moving closer to cradle the boy's hand between both of his. "You have flown further than many who live twice your years," he said, voice steady despite the tremor at its edges. "You have nothing left to prove to anybody." And tears welled in Ravi's eyes, slipping sideways into his hair. "Thank you for letting me be your son," he whispered, the words costing him but needed, and Kareem's vision blurred, the boy's face doubling. "Thank you for letting an old man be a father again," he answered, leaning down to press a kiss to Ravi's forehead, a benediction, a goodbye. His movement jostled Tara, who snorted awake, then blinked, realization dawning as she saw their clasped hands. The tears, the way Ravi's chest rose and fell so slowly. "No," she said immediately, scooting closer, her voice fraying. "Not yet, okay." You promised we'd watch the next festival together, remember? With the lights and the sweet shops. And Ravi turned his head with effort, meeting her gaze. I remember, he assured her, a weak smile tugging at his lips. But, I think I'll have to watch from somewhere else now. And she shook her head violently, tears spilling. I don't want you there. I want you here, she protested, childish and wise all at once. Who's going to laugh at my stupid jokes? Who's going to take the blame when I steal rotis from Laxmi auntie? And he exhaled a little laugh that turned into a cough, but he managed to say, You'll find someone even more foolish than me. Then grew serious, his eyes searching hers. Promise me you'll eat, Tara. He urged, every word an effort now. Even when it feels too hard. And don't stay in the rain too long. And don't let anyone make you smaller than you are, okay? And she nodded, tears streaming. I promise, she choked out. I promise, I promise, I promise. As if saying it enough times could build a bridge between this moment and all the ones they were being robbed of. Outside, the slum was waking up. Roosters crowing. Vendors dragging carts into place, the distant honk of buses beginning their daily circuits, life assembling itself as it always had, unaware that in one small room, a chapter was closing. Ravi's breaths grew shallower, his grip weaker, but his eyes stayed on the faces he loved. Will you stay? He asked, though he already knew the answer. And Kareem squeezed his hand gently. We are here, he said. We are not going anywhere. And Tara leaned in, pressing her forehead lightly to his, their tears mingling. I'm right here, funny heart, she whispered. Right here. In those final minutes, Ravi felt no dramatic visions, no flash of his life passing before his eyes. He felt instead the texture of Kareem's calloused hand around his, the warmth of Tara's forehead against his, the faint smell of tea and rain in the city, the murmur of voices soft and close, and underneath it all, the odd, quiet knowledge that for all the years he had been abandoned, forgotten, overlooked, he was not alone now, not in this most terrifying of thresholds. Mama. He breathed once, barely audible, not as a plea this time, but as a greeting, as if he were finally addressing a picture in his mind without pain. I found a family, and then, on a long, trembling exhale that did not quite return, his chest stilled. His fingers loosened, and a stillness settled over his small frame that was different from sleep. Deeper and more final. For a moment, there was only the sound of morning outside and the ticking of Kareem's old clock, and then Tara let out a sound between a sob and a wail, collapsing into Kareem's side as he gathered both grieving child and departed one into his arms, rocking gently, whispering a prayer under his breath. Heart for the boy whose suffering was finally over, heart for the ones left behind to carry the weight of his absence. Later, there would be rituals, and tears, and the quiet, stunned way the slum would talk about the boy with the weak heart who held on for 11 long, difficult years. There would be nights when Tara lay awake, hand reaching out into the empty space where his thin shoulder used to be, and mornings when Kareem, setting out 3 cups by habit, would pause and put one away, his throat tight, but there would also be something else, something quieter and more enduring. The memory of those last 10 days, when a child who had been thrown away at 6 found, at the end, a place where he was wanted, where someone listened to his stories and scolded him for joking about death and kissed his forehead goodnight, And for anyone listening to this story, sitting far from the slum's tangled alleys, it might be tempting to remember only the cruelty of his beginning or the sorrow of his end. Yet somewhere between the two lies the truth of his short life. That even the smallest, frailest heart, left to beat alone in the harshest places, still reaches for connection, still longs for warmth, and sometimes, just in time, finds it in the unlikeliest of homes, in the arms of a stranger who becomes family. In the last 10 days, that mean more than the 5 empty years that came before. Thank you for watching till the end. If you like this story, subscribe this channel for more stories like this.